Hello, my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Psychology Podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Okay, if you guys are listening or watching this, I just want to say thank you so much for still being here. I know it's been so long. I mean, with all the holidays and just like normal life stuff, some things just kind of get put on the back burner by accident. But if you're still here, like I said, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. But we're back, and I'm so excited to be back because I've missed you all so much, and this little podcast of mine that I've just kind of like made my little baby, right? Okay, so over the holidays, I found myself going down like a YouTube rabbit hole, as one does, and I found myself on Neuralink YouTube. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Well, if you don't know, Neuralink is Mr. Elon Musk's attempt at brain implants. I say attempt because as far as I know, Neuralink was only recently approved by the FDA this past year, 2024. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe only one person has been brave enough to get it. Now listen, we can all agree to disagree about Musk and what he represents, especially after these past couple of years. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. Like, I'm not here to argue about him as a person, so please don't go in the comments. Please, just don't, okay? I don't have time for that. But as I read more and more on his Neuralink experiment, I realized that I hadn't done an episode on the history of like brain implants. And I was like, wait, this kind of fits perfectly into this season's theme. Kinda, right? So here we are. Today, we're learning about the history of brain implants and its intentions for the treatment of mental illnesses. So if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy tozy and let's jump into it. Alright, so if you're watching on YouTube, I got my little friend over here. I've had her for years, actually. My parents got it for me for my birthday a long time ago. I really thought I had lost her in the move, but I didn't. She's here with me. And also, again, if you're watching on YouTube or on Spotify, because I now upload videos on Spotify too. I don't know if you guys know that. So if you're listening on Spotify, you can also watch it on Spotify. So anyways, also, my favorite hoodie of all time says "Women Come CUM first." If you know, you know. All right, enough of that. All right, so the history of chips doesn't go back too far, considering that even to this day, it's very, very much a large technological advancement. Now, what exactly are brain implants? Brain implants, also known as neurological implants, are technological devices that connect directly to someone or something's brain. The main purpose of these devices is to establish a biomedical prosthesis circumventing areas in the brain that have become dysfunctional after a traumatic incident such as a stroke or a major head injury. These dysfunctional areas of the brain include sensory substitutions such as vision and smell. In other cases, these devices are also being used to help treat mental disorders such as Parkinson's disease and clinical depression, in that order. I say in that order because when I was doing my research, it specifically said in that order, so. And okay, so like side note, like in case you're not too familiar with Parkinson's disease, it's a disorder of the central nervous system that affects movement caused by nerve cell damage in the brain that decreases levels of dopamine. So because it is a disorder of the central nervous system, it's considered a mental disorder, even though it mostly affects like your limbs and like stuff. So even though it's very much a today technological advancement, believe it or not, the use of electrical currents through the brain for the cause and effect date all the way back to the 1700s. Crazy, I know. So in 1780, Italian physician and physicist Luigi Galvani discovered that there was a type of electrical fluid inherent in the body. He called this animal electricity. Why? Well, because in 1771, he took it upon himself to research the connections between the brain and the bodily movements using frogs. So, Galvani and his assistants hung frog legs from an iron railing with brass hooks dangling from the frog's spinal nerves. One hook touched the railing, and when it touched the railing, the attached frog legs kicked. Placing the legs and hooks on other metals and doing the same had a similar effect. But nothing happened when they placed the frog on non-conducting materials such as wood, glass, or resin. Now, this was groundbreaking to say the least. I mean, just then in 1752, Benjamin Franklin had just conducted his kite and thunderstorm experiment, and now it's 1780, and we have Luigi Galvani stimulating dead frog legs with electrical shocks. Crazy. Also, side note, did anybody ever get to dissect frogs back in school? Because I was always under the impression that it was something everybody got the chance to do. So I walked into middle school with the hope of being able to dissect a frog, and then high school, nothing ever happened. It wasn't until college that I got to dissect sheep brain, which, don't get me wrong, was so cool, and I would do it again if I ever had the chance. But false hope for the frog, right? All right, now let's fast forward a century to 1870 with German neurologist Eduard Hitzig. In 1870, Dr. Hitzig and a fellow doctor by the name Gustav Frisch discovered that they could stimulate the brains of live dogs. So we went from frogs to dogs. That rhymed. They found that not only could they cause crude movements of the dog's bodies, but that specific areas of the brain controlled specific muscle movements. Again, groundbreaking. So in a way, you're telling me that it took us 100 years to fully discover that muscle movements were in fact controlled by parts of the brain? I mean, hey, slow and steady wins the race. And look where we are now, right? So again, in 1870, Eduard Hitzig and Gustav Frisch caused muscle movements through electrical current stimulation of specific parts of dog brains and discovered that muscles do in fact have connections to the brain, specifically the cerebral cortex. Now get this, because not long after this, just 4 years after to be in fact, in 1874, Dr. Robert Bartholow inserted stimulating electrodes into a patient's brain through a cancerous hole in her skull. This was the first ever demonstration in a human being of the motor excitability of the cerebral cortex. So again, in just 4 short years, we went from testing on a dog to testing on a human. That's just crazy, okay? And then again, we went from, in 100 years, from frogs to dogs to humans. What? I can't be the only person nerding out right now. I find this just so interesting. Now, let's fast forward another 50 years to 1924 with German psychiatrist Dr. Hans Berger. That name sounds really familiar. I've never seen the Pink Panther, but for some reason, Burger. I've seen that scene so many times. You guys know which one I'm talking about? Hamburger. Anyways, so in 1924, Dr. Hans Berger used his invention of the EEG and was the first person to ever record an electrical brain signal in humans. He used an EEG to record electrical activity, aka brainwaves, from the human brain for the very first time in history. I can't imagine how mind-blowing that must have been, and without the need of having to pry open someone's skull to look and dig in there, that's fucking insane. Good for him. Now let's move a little more forward to 1952 with Spanish researcher Dr. José Delgado. Delgado was an interesting man, as is any psychiatrist and neuroscientist if we're being honest, but Delgado was known for using electricity to elicit rage, anxiety, pleasure, and involuntary movements in animals and humans. I don't know, maybe I should do a separate episode on just him because he has a lot going on for him. I don't know, I'll have to think about it. But for the sake of today's episode, in 1952, Delgado demonstrated his ability to control and stop the behavior of a charging bowl using implanted electrodes. Think about how insane that sounds, okay? And think about the fact that this was 1952. Okay, now stick with me because honestly, I had never heard about this guy until I began my research for this episode. So we're learning this together, okay? Argue in the comments if you believe this to be true because many articles claim it was just a publicity stunt. But nonetheless, many others do believe he truly paved the way for mind control. Now, let's jump forward a few more years to 1969, the year the first cochlear implant is implanted. A cochlear implant is a special hearing aid that stimulates the auditory nerve through electrodes placed in the cochlea of the inner ear, allowing for some severely deaf people to perceive sounds. Okay, so technically, the very first cochlear implant was created by Dr. Andre DiGiorno. You know what? He did too much good for this world. I'm not even going to joke about his name. Okay. But again, yes, Dr. Andre DiGiorno did create the very first cochlear implant in 1957. Originally, his design distributed stimulation using a single channel. However, it wasn't until 1969 that Dr. Graham Milbourne Clark changed lives with his creation of the multi-channel cochlear implant. This was absolutely groundbreaking for all the reasons you can think of, but also because it demonstrated the endless possibilities of neural implants. Okay, let's jump forward a few more years to 1996, the year yours truly was born. In 1996, neurotrophic electrodes are implanted in a paralyzed man, enabling him to control a computer cursor. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Mind you, this was the late 1900s. Ouch, that hurts to say out loud. But the 1990s, and we're beginning to see a new era of neurology. Dr. Phil Kennedy, not affiliated with the famous Kennedys that I know of, invented the first ever neurotrophic electrode in 1996. Neurotrophic electrodes are an intercortical device designed to read electrical signals that the brain uses to process information. These were invented by neurologist Dr. Philip Kennedy, and as mentioned, it was successfully implanted in a human patient in 1996 by his neurosurgeon and buddy, Dr. Roy Bakay. The main purpose of the design wasn't as cosmetic as the others. And by cosmetic, I mean like for fun. I mean, look, as a PhD student, I totally get it. And trust me, I have heard it all at this point. Often academics are seen as people with their heads in books and nothing else. Like, have we forgotten that a lot of what we know about anything can be credited back to academics? Like, we are literally seekers of information, looking to find a way to prove that piece of information, no matter how small. A quote that I will never forget was one of my professors, my first year of my PhD program. She told us, "You are no longer the receivers of information. You are now the creators of information." And that will always stick with me because once you cross that threshold from like college or graduate student to a doctoral student, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what a dissertation is. You are no longer just reading and taking in information, but you are using what you know and what you've learned and what's out there to create, to give, and to make a difference. Like, does that make sense? I really hope it does, because I am not here to prove my worth or prove my work to anybody out there except for myself, but it can get annoying. So sorry about my little tangent there, but again, with Dr. Kennedy's findings, when I say it wasn't as cosmetic as those in the past, is that though a lot of those in the past were really focused on like, ooh, let's see what happens if we do this. Let's see what happens if we press this, or like if we trigger this. And Dr. Kennedy's findings, his main aim was to help paralyzed victims who couldn't move or communicate, but were fully conscious, be able to move their muscles through thought process. Like, do you see the difference? Do you see what I'm getting at? When Dr. Kennedy designed the electrode, he knew it had to be wireless, biologically compatible, and capable of chronic implantation. Neural signals are collected by the electrodes, then travel up through some wires and through the skull. Signals are then sent through the transmitter where they're converted into FM signals and broadcast with an antenna. Kind of like a portable radio. Literally, actually. You don't remember those? And if you don't, you are way too young for me. Okay, so the FM transmitters I just mentioned are all contained within this thing called a surface mount printed circuit board that sits on the person's scalp, like just kind of like sits in the back. The ultimate test came when the test subject was able to move a mouse cursor using the signals sent from the device to his muscles. It's a lot that went into it for sure, and I think we have to remember that it was in the 1990s and it was the first of its kind, like literally. Like you really have to think about it to fully get it. This man was paralyzed and using a brain device was able to move certain muscles. Insane. So yeah, in 1996, neurotrophic electrodes were implanted in a paralyzed man, enabling him to control a computer cursor. So for the sake of today's episode, let's move on from 1996. Although honestly, I could go on even further about Dr. Kennedy. He's still alive and thriving and conducting experiments on himself. The guy's a little bit insane, but all the great minds are, right? Now, just 1 year after this amazing discovery, in 1997, deep brain stimulation was approved in the US. Okay, so listen, initially I was going to do an entire episode just on deep brain stimulation. However, I decided to just kind of include it into this part of today's episode, just kind of fit better. So deep brain stimulation is a surgical procedure that implants neurotransmitters and electrodes, which then send electrical impulses to specified targets in the brain responsible for movement control. Again, we're focusing on muscle movement here and helping paralyzed victims. Awesome. We love that. Deep brain stimulation is because it's still an active procedure intended for those with muscular difficulties such as Parkinson's disease, which we briefly touched on at the beginning of the episode. Okay, so up to now, we're doing okay, right? Science and technology are advancing to help the field of medicine treat those who really need the medical help. Well, welcome to the 2000s, where shit kind of began to hit the fan at an accelerated pace. In the early 2000s, the company BrainGate wanted to revolutionize how we use computers. Now, instead of using computers to activate the human brain, we are now using the human brain to activate computers. Sounds about right. BrainGate is a brain implant system designed to help those who've lost control of their limbs or other bodily functions, for example, ALS or a spinal cord injury using computer technology. In 2005, a man with tetraplegia is able to control a robot arm due to a brain-computer interference created as part of the early stages of the BrainGate project. Using all these fancy connections and electrodes, we were truly seeing the beginning of mind control for robotic use. Then in 2012, the same BrainGate company hit another huge milestone when a woman was able to use her own thoughts to get a computerized robot arm to feed her a drink through a straw. I vaguely remember hearing about this. I was in high school at the time, but when researching it, it did give me a bit of deja vu. I've always been a nerd about this kind of stuff, so I did kind of read up into it. Like I said, vaguely remember, but I do vaguely remember it. Also, apparently, BrainGate is in no way affiliated with Bill Gates, which just thought I'd put that out there. I don't want anyone or anything coming after me, please. Okay, so now we're finally in Elon Musk territory. In 2016, Mr. Musk launches Neuralink to develop ultra-high bandwidth brain-machine interference. That's a mouthful. So maybe I'm just not too involved in his business, but I had no idea this was going on since 2016, and probably a lot earlier than that. Don't judge me, okay? Like I said, not a fan of Musk himself. But essentially, in layman's terms, Neuralink aims to help people with paralysis communicate by allowing them to remotely control devices using brain activity. It is noted that Neuralink does not plan to stop there, however. According to their page, in the future, Neuralink may help enhance user memory and cognitive abilities, restore user motor, sensory and visual functions, as well as treat neurological disorders. As we've learned throughout this episode, it's not the first time a tiny device has been implanted in a human brain, but a lot of the controversy comes from the medical field. Given Musk's reputation, I'm not surprised. It's been centuries of research behind topics such as this, and Musk just kind of appeared with this out of the blue, it's not something that should be taken so lightly, despite the fact that I'm sure he has a giant team of medical experts behind him in this. But again, given his reputation, is it credible? Now, Neuralink's critics, a lot of it comes from the concerns that Neuralink has a lack of transparency from the very beginning, specifically towards the vulnerability of hacking. Vulnerability. It's like the word rural. I think it's like the R's that get me. Okay, so brain-computer interferences have a high potential to transform some people's lives. Yes, there is no denying that, okay? But also, they raise a host of ethical issues that can be dangerous if not looked into carefully and taken with caution. Early last year, the first Neuralink chip was implanted into its very first test subject. His name is Nolan Arbog, a 29-year-old quadriplegic man who is paralyzed from the neck down. Okay, also according to their website, I believe they recently got approved by the Canadian version of the FDA and are currently looking for candidates in Canada. So if you're in Canada watching this, honestly, good for Nolan if that's what he really wanted, but I do want to believe that it was made to help those in need and not to take advantage of the human race. Are we one step closer to mind control? Bring out my tinfoil hat, would ya? I mean, think about it. The man has such a large following, and I've no doubt that there are people out there who are completely healthy who would be willing to put the chip into their minds despite any known fears. No doubt about it. And he knows that. He knows this. His team knows this. And if anything, these last couple of years have proven that, okay? Is it scary? Absolutely. That's why I said bring out my tinfoil hat. But also, I like to think about it as natural selection, if you will. Only time will tell. Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Today was a little different, a little less storytelling, a little more timeline, but nonetheless, I hope you guys learned a thing or two. I know I did for sure. Let me know if you'd be willing to trust a chip in your brain for research or simply because you're a Musk fan. If you liked today's episode, please remember to subscribe, and follow the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Also follow the podcast on Instagram at the Say Psychology Podcast for all episode news and updates. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay sane, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.